Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Janky Asian Theater. Tonight we're going to do the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. I'd like to wish you all a happy beginning of October and a 30 more day span till Halloween. Now, let's get it started. So, we start off in 1899, and it's London, and there's a fucking tank tearing up the street. And, you know, British policemen, being not as bright as they are, just run up to it and start hitting it with their billy clubs. So eventually they smash into, like, the London Royal Bank, where there's, like, you know, a handful of British soldiers. And it just keeps tanking through, and, like, it kind of runs over one guy, but we think he's okay. They just did, like, the generic helmet crush thing. But eventually they get into it, they blow off the bank door, and the cops are right behind, and, like, it opens up. And a bunch of German soldiers totally come out, along with this, like, you know, Two-Face kind of guy. We don't know his name is yet, but he's got, like, a horrid, burnt half of a face with, like, an eye just kind of hanging out. And, like, he's totally like, oh, leave one of them alive to tell the tale. And there's gunfire in the back, and he steals the blueprints to Venice. Foreshadowing. Now, about a while later, the same guy ends up in Berlin, and he starts blowing the shit out of, like, balloons there, and, like, you know, German scientists are all freaking out, except this time he's with British soldiers, and he's like, oh, I'm so afraid I'm gonna totally cause turmoil throughout Europe. And then all of a sudden there's, you know, the montage of spinning papers that say, oh no, World War about to break out, Germany's filled with shit, British didn't do anything, our food sucks. Anyway, that happens, and we find ourselves in Africa with this one guy who's represented by this dinosaur. He totally goes into this adventuring house, and there's a bunch of old farts in there, and he's asking for some dude called Quartermain, which this equally old fart answers, and he's like, yes, hi, Mr. Quartermain. And he's like, well, your country needs you, sir. And out of fucking nowhere, sitting at him, James Bond turns around, and he's like, yes, but does my country need me? And, like, the British guy is like, wait, you're Quartermain? Damn right I'm Quartermain. What do you need? So, he basically lays down that somebody is trying to fuck around with the world power and all that kind of shit. And Quartermain's like, Britain can go fuck herself. And he totally sits down and starts enjoying a nice cup of whiskey, when out of nowhere a bunch of guys in, like, shell armor show up with automatic weapons and just start shooting up the place. So Quartermain, coolly finishing his whiskey, briskly gets up, grabs this guy by the neck, and jumps over into cover while his friend gets shot, like, 50 times. So he totally gets up, and he's all badass, throws his hat off, and starts shooting at these guys. And, like, the British spy is like, they're indestructible! You shut the fuck up, you little bitch. So, he totally shoots them up, and, like, they eventually get outside, because one guy runs outside. And this dude, being a pessimistic little bitch, is like, oh, but he's too far, you're never going to make the shot. You hold on, it sucks being old. And he puts on a pair of glasses, and he shoots him, right in the back. So this guy falls over from like 900 yards, and they drag him back over here, but he ingests a poison capsule. So now he's dead. And the British agent is like, well, it seems like the war has found itself to Africa too. And then the adventure house blows up. So that happens. And now Quartermain is homeless and pissed off. So Quartermain, played by Sean Connery, is like, take me where you want to go. So they end up in London, where he meets this guy called M. And M starts going on about, oh, well, the Queen has always created a secret alliance of people. You see, the British people lack two things the League can provide: optimism and common sense. So he starts introducing him. So first we have Captain Nemo, pirate of the sea, technological science pirate. And he's like, oh, I've seen you before, Quartermain. Oh, we're not going to get along because you're Doc. And, like, you know, he totally runs into the Invisible Man, portrayed by this guy. So the Invisible Man runs into him, he's like, what the fuck was that? And he's like, oh, well, that's Griffin. You see, he drank a potion some guy made up a long time ago, and now he's invisible. And the Invisible Man totally goes like, he always makes some joke about his penis, because people can't see it. So, you know, Quartermain gets pissed off and disgruntled. And tonight, being portrayed by Dracula, is Mrs. Mina from Dracula. So she totally steps in there, and she's like, that's right, I have a woman, and I am a woman, and I have a vagina, and I'm proud of it, so shut your bitch faces up. And everybody's like, oh, okay, well, now that we have 4 of you assembled, you're going to have to go to the East London docks and recruit the 5th member. So, you know, M totally does the whole smoke and vanish thing, and Captain Nemo drives up with his chauffeur, and they're like, what the fuck is that thing? And Captain Nemo is like, I call it an automobile. So they all get inside the automobile and drive down to the East London docks, where, you know, they end up at this shithole of a house. And in the shithole of a house is like this very attractive young man, and they find out his name is none other than Monsieur Dorian Gray. And they get invited inside, and Dorian Gray appears to know some of them, and he's like, yes, well, I'm snobby and pretty, and no, I don't think I'm going to help the British Empire. I think I can live throughout. And like, you know, James Bond is totally like, wait, I remember you. You were at this college in Africa giving a lecture. And Mina totally makes a snap about how, like, oh, you're so fucking old. You taught this guy science or how to hunt or skin a deer or some shit like that. And James Bond, without backhanding her, goes like, no, it was actually the other way around. I was a boy, and he was the one giving a lecture. And they're like, what? But now, out of fucking nowhere, a bunch of the same armored henchmen show up and surround them. And the fucking Two-Face shows out of nowhere, and he's like, well, if it isn't the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. And, you know, James Bond totally has a shit fit because he's like, oh, what the fuck? And he looks around, and there's a whole bunch of people. And then there's this one guy, and he gives him a wink, and, you know, it's 1899. He's not sure whether to interpret that as, I'm gonna save your life wink, or I'll see you by the dumpster later wink. So, that happens, and the Phantom gives him, like, the generic bad guy, join me, and we'll rule Europe together in fire and brimstone. And everybody's like, no, fuck you. You're crazy. And this guy turns his gun, and he totally shoots one of the henchmen, and all hell breaks loose. So, you know, Captain Nemo does some really cool Indian shit and starts stabbing people over and over again. Mina is just over in the corner because she's a woman. And, you know, Dorian Gray is just kind of like walking around with his sword cane and slashing people's shit up. So, James Bond, being the badass he is, goes straight for the Phantom, who this guy is, and, like, the Phantom runs away. This new guy who saved them jumps down, and he totally does some American cowboy shit. Invisible Man is dicking around with a book, naked, beating up some guy on the floor. And, you know, he totally gets into a fist fight with Phantom. It's much more intense in the movie. But yeah, they totally get into a fist fight, and then like this captain comes down, and he's like, James, run! So he totally gets away, and like James Bond beats the shit out of this guy because now somebody got away, and they can call James Bond incompetent. So he beats the shit out of this guy, and everybody is all like, oh wow, that was some fight there. And then Dorian gets shot a couple of times, and everybody's like, oh no, Dorian! But he gets up, and all the bullets turn to sand, and he stabs this guy, and he's like, what are you? I'm complicated. And he stabs him. And then Mina makes some snarky comment, and some guy holds her up with a knife. So everybody's like, oh shit, he's got the woman by a knife. We can't do anything now, because that's a woman, and if they cut her, oh, we're all going to jail. So the guy's like, yeah, that's what I thought, but then they forgot that Mina is a Dracula, and she totally breaks this guy's neck and sucks him dry like a candy. So she gets up, and she's totally licking her fingers, and Tom, like, this guy is like, wow, they did say European women were different. And she's like, who the fuck are you? And he's like, Sawyer, American Secret Service, inbred racist. So he totally shows up, and they're like, oh, so the Americans know about the condition too. It's like, yeah, so they sent me to help because we're Americans and we can't leave anybody to their own business. So they totally get in the automobile, Dorian Gray decides to hop along because, you know, he's had fun now. And they go over, and they hit the water, and everybody is like, how the fuck are we gonna get to Venice? And Nemo is like, by boat, of course. And, you know, since Sean Connery is a little old, he's like, but that'll take a week or so. It'll take forever. And Captain Nemo's like, fuck you, I have a boat. Check this shit out. And the Nautilus totally pops out of nowhere. And now they basically get to travel there like a 5-star resort, and everybody gets on the boat. Now, they go over to Paris to recruit the last member of the League, Mr. Hyde. So, you know, James Bond is totally running around Paris streets, shooting at, like, Mr. Hyde as he's hopping from building to building, like in his fucking suit. We can only assume he's killed or raped somebody, like in the comic books. So he jumps around, and eventually Quartermain, like, the stun shoots him, and he falls to the floor, and there's a net, and he gets dragged back. And Sawyer is just like, damn, how the hell do you get them bullets to land correctly? I aim, son. It's something you need to learn. So they get back to the boat, and everybody's there, and like they offer Mr. Hyde a deal. They're like, if you help us, we'll give you complete amnesty for whatever fucked up things you did in Britain. And, you know, Mr. Hyde is like, ooh, they do say home is where the heart is, and I have been missing Britain. And he turns back into a pitiful little man, Dr. Jekyll, and he's like, can I have my clothes back? So now the League is completely assembled. We have Tom Sawyer of the American Secret Service, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, James Bond, Dracula Woman, Dorian Gray, Captain Nemo, and Invisible Man. Now, they're all talking to each other, and, like, you know, Invisible Man's doing some sketchy stuff. Dorian Gray gets with Dracula, and, you know, they're totally doing it in the ship. Skinner may or may not have been in the room watching them. It's a real problem to have a person who's a pervert and invisible on the ship with a woman. So anyway, there's a little bit of bonding going on between James Bond and Tom Sawyer, and he teaches him how to shoot. And bonding. So he teaches him how to shoot, and then Tom Sawyer makes some offhand comment about, did you teach your son how to do this too? And James Bond totally just leaves him up there because he lost his son in his last mission, and Tom Sawyer's like, wow, I'm an idiot. So they arrive at Venice, and they eventually figure out that Phantom's plan is to take bombs all over the city and blow up the superstructure to stop this so-called meeting of world leaders that's supposedly happening there in secret. So the team decides to split up. Captain Nemo will help evacuate the citizens over here with Mr. Hyde and Dorian Gray. Mrs. Dracula Woman will go assist Mr. Bond and Sawyer, and they're going to go place countercharges, so they think more explosions are going to stop explosions. It's a solid plan. So they totally get into the automobile, and they start driving around, and like Mina shows how badass of a vampire she is by turning into like a million bats and tearing apart people on like the top of the wall. Meanwhile, you know, James Bond and Tom Sawyer are totally driving around, and they use the car as a homing device, so the Nautilus can shoot a torpedo into that part of the city and stop the explosions with a bigger explosion. So they eventually get there, but James Bond, with his, you know, Sean Connery vision, sees M, and, well, I mean the Phantom, and the Phantom's like, oh shit, and he runs away like a bitch. So James